here tonight, and I'm hoping that we have some more people trickle in. But for those of you with whom I'm not acquainted, I'm Carolyn Connolly. I'm the principal of the middle high school. And we are hoping to continue a conversation tonight that obviously we all agree is very important to the safety and well-being of our student body. And so the program for the evening will go as follows. I'm going to make some general introductions for our staff, kind of our panel of experts here. Some of them are scattered throughout the audience as well. We're going to have a conversation about the Communities That Care survey that was administered last spring. Those results have been shared in several fora already, and Mr. Scott and Mr. Sweeney will review those with you this evening. We're going to talk about the things we've already addressed as a school community in terms of the steps we have taken this year and in previous years to try to tackle some of these very challenging issues with our students, with our school community, talk about all of the parties that need to be involved in that. We're going to talk about the current curriculum topics that are covered in grades 6 through 12, where we target certain elements in each of the grade levels. That's why our health teachers have joined us here this evening. We're going to talk about the areas that I think will be of most concern to you and the ones we think are most relevant to our student body, and that's when Mr. Sweeney will outline for you the series of assemblies we have planned to have with students over the next couple of weeks and the conversations we're hoping that they will stimulate as the starting point. And so we're going to share a lot of information, then open it up to folks at the end of the night for a Q&A session and talk about next steps. So I think I'll take a few minutes to introduce Mr. Brian Scott, our high school assistant principal. Mr. Torrin Sweeney is our department chair for health, wellness, and guidance. Mr. Mike Pimentel is a middle school health and wellness and phys ed teacher. Amy Green is also a middle school health, wellness, and phys ed teacher. One of our adjustment counselors, Mrs. Leanne McCarthy, is in the back row. Sergeant Mike Lopes is to her right, our beloved SRO. And the middle school assistant principal, Mrs. Kerry Sandler. And of course, Judy Collins, who helps to keep us all safe and well. And at various points in the evening, if there are other faculty members or other resident experts present and you feel it's appropriate to introduce yourself and the role that you play in your professional capacity, as well as your role as a parent, that would certainly be most welcome. So I think I'll hand it off to Mr. Scott to start going through the survey. And again, thanks everyone for being here. And any questions that you have, if they're not addressed during the course of the presentation, we will certainly get to them before you leave this evening. Okay? Thanks so much.
And we are taping it for folks who couldn't be here tonight, so just so that you're aware. We will stop taping it when it's Q&A, just in case you want to overshare. But if you have a burning question and you want to ask it during the presentation, please feel free. We're going to go over a couple of things. We'll revisit the survey that we gave, the Communities That Care survey, last March. We'll talk about the results. We've presented at school committee. We've presented to a couple of different groups already, so I apologize if you've heard those. And we'll talk about what we have done from March to now and what we really kind of plan on doing down the road. The Communities That Care survey is one of two that are used for these types of things. The other is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and that's used by a lot of schools. But basically, we sat down, the PSO and the Safe Harbor Coalition co-sponsored this one, and we looked at both. Torrens used one in the past, the Youth Risk Behavior. This one got good reviews. It was used by a smaller group of schools, but they liked the results that they got because they looked with a little bit broader of a brush. Having done it, there were things that we liked about it, there were things that we like about the youth risk behavior, but in general, the information is the same. It is an accredited survey. We did give it to everybody, 93% of the student body in grades 6 to 12. They did not know it was coming. They took it very seriously. We'll talk about that a little bit. Because it was a test, and our kids take tests very seriously. So you could hear a pin drop when we were administering it. It looks at kind of three things. One, the actual prevalence of what's going on. So in the moment, in the last 30 days, over the past couple of months, what have you, as students of Cohasset Middle High School, done? Then it looks at two other things. It looks at protective factors. So what are those indicators in the community that would reduce the risk of substance abuse? What are we doing as a Cohasset community? And then the risk factors. What are those things, what are those indicators that we might look at that would indicate a problem? So it looks at all three of those factors. The question of credibility came up. How seriously do they take it, right, if they're not getting graded on it? We had a secure environment. We did it during utility periods, so kids were in their rooms in groups of 12, 15. administered by a teacher. And then me and Mr. Sweeney went through each one of them. You know, we looked for answers that were off the charts. You know, do you experience a lot of gang violence, right? If they're answering yes to all of that, that one doesn't count, right? And we only threw out one, I think.
One kid said he hadn't been to school, and
Yeah, one kid said he hadn't been to school in 60 days or something like that. And, that wasn't true. But we also looked at it against our internal data. So did it match up with our, when they reported on their grades? Did it match up with our grade distribution? Did it match up with the number of suspensions that we had, the amount of co-curricular involvement? So there are all kinds of other ways to see, did the kids answer truthfully on the things that we know? And if they did, why wouldn't they have answered truthfully on the things that we're trying to figure out? It also reflects a lot of our mental health trends as well. And Leanne can certainly speak to that later on if you have questions about more specifics there. We didn't find any other abnormalities. So, as I said, the number of kids who answered about handguns or gang involvement, those were minimal. They basically all said no. There aren't a lot of handguns. There is no gang presence. So all of those factors together made us think that, yeah, this stuff is accurate. What they're reporting can be relied on. So we took the report, and the report was about 300 pages, and we took their executive summary and kind of put that aside, because while that was good, it didn't really talk about our kids in the context of our school. So we basically scrubbed all the data, considered what their recommendations were, but then put together what we thought were the most compelling pieces of evidence from the survey. And what we found was a couple of things. One, that there's a big jump in 10 to 12. So the big jump in use is from 9 to 10, and then it continues grades 10, 11, and 12. We found that a lot of it was related to culture. So peer attitudes, peer pressure, what they perceive as, or maybe what are actually favorable drug laws, parental attitudes. Those were the largest contributing factors to why they said it wasn't a big deal. We saw that the prevalence of drug and alcohol abuse did mirror what our in-school disciplinary findings were, so that was accurate. But also noticed the parallel between the drug use and anxiety, and want to know and have asked the question, is there a correlation? Are kids medicating because they are anxious, or is there some other correlation that's there? Are they anxious because they are medicating? Or is it just a red herring and we're looking in the wrong direction? But it is something that's curious. And the more you look at it, the more you realize that the behaviors are surface behaviors. The more pressing thing of the iceberg underneath. What is it that is leading to this type of use? And what can we do to kind of get at the root of it, as opposed to just addressing it in the moment, with a chemical health violation or a suspension or something like that. So these were the results in the past 30 days. And on the far left are cigarettes, alcohol use, marijuana, and prescription drugs. And the grades go in order. So the purple column are seniors, and the red column, which you can barely see, are sixth graders. And I would guess that one sixth grader probably is on medication that he considered prescription drugs, right? Not illegal prescription drugs, but he probably takes something. And you see a big spike, right? So all the way through 6, 7, 8, 9 is this column here. And then it really jumps up, both in alcohol and in marijuana, and with a particular jump in seniors. This number here is 64% and 51%. So 64% of seniors had a drink within the last 30 days. 51% had smoked marijuana. That's a lot of kids. The next one asked over a lifetime. So this was lifetime use. And again, alcohol and marijuana are the two biggest. But by the time you get to be a senior, 86% of the senior class, which last year was roughly 100 kids, had tried alcohol in their lifetime. Right? 73% of the senior class had smoked marijuana in their lifetime. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are regular users. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. But it means that about 63% of all high school students will experiment with something before they graduate. Will experiment with alcohol, excuse me. And about 39% of all high school students will experiment with marijuana. So the numbers are big. You know, there's 450 kids in the school right now. 63% is a lot of kids. It is still concerning to me that alcohol is more prevalent than marijuana, and I think that's important not to forget. So I know we have, you know, the opioid crisis, which is gathering a lot of momentum at the state level, as it should, and I know, you know, the recent law changes regarding marijuana have put that kind of on the front pages, but alcohol still is the biggest drug that our kids are using, and it is the most important one, I think, for us to combat at this level. Because the reality is, if 90% of the seniors have tried alcohol, then the perception that everyone does it is not just the perception, it's the truth, right? Or that everyone has tried it. And that's something that I think is important not to forget. These next 4 slides give us a better indication of which behaviors are happening and how that compares to the national averages. So here we're going to see that alcohol use over the past 30 days is roughly between 1 and 9 times. So 1 and 9 times over the past 30 days suggests to me that we're looking at mostly weekend drinking, all right? So, you know, 57%, 42%, 1 to 9 times. The rest drops off considerably. So of that 64% of seniors who've tried alcohol in the last 30 days, 57% are doing it on the weekends. At the beach, at someone's house, as one kid put it, any shed will do. Those are his words. Right? In contrast, and a little bit later on, we'll see that marijuana use is a little bit more prevalent during the week. It's still big on the weekends, but you see more of it during the week. This compares Cohasset to the national average, and we're the darker blue line on top. So you can see down at 9th grade, we're relatively, or even a little bit lower than what the national average is. About 17% for 9th graders, we're at about 12. But the national average is on a much flatter increase than ours. Ours tends to spike quite a bit, to the point where our seniors are significantly higher than the national average, as are our juniors, right? And of course, these again are last year's seniors and last year's juniors. Marijuana use in the past 30 days. Here again, we see, you know, in the 1 to 9 column, mostly weekend use, but, you know, the 11.7% under the 40 or more times in the 12th grade, 40 or more times in the last 30 days is a couple of times a day, right? You know, more than once a day on average, which is kind of proven by common sense too, right? We don't find kids drunk at school. I don't think I've ever had a kid drunk here at school. I have had kids who are stoned, right? So if you have enough of a problem where you are ducking off into the bathroom to smoke a quick joint and you caught, that's more of what we see at the high school level.
What's the prevalence of that? How often do you see that?
We'll get into chemical health violations and stuff of that nature a little bit later. Off the top of my head, I mean, it's very rare. So assuming that I catch a third of what maybe happens or a half of what maybe happens, I can't even think off the top of my head if we've had one in school this year. One maybe? Yeah. It's very rare that it happens in school. So it's still happening during the week, and I don't mean to suggest that if you're doing it twice a day, one of those times is potentially at school. It's very rare that kids do it here, and they would report to us the same, that if they're being very candid and not a kid who's sitting in front of you is in trouble, that, you know, the reality is it's happening in the village. There's 20 different spots around town where they know they can go, but they're too smart to be doing it in the building and risking all of this, you know. That said, there's always a couple of kids a year. Protective factors, as I mentioned earlier, kind of look at those things that we do that prevent these types of behaviors. And it's not on a percentage base. So when you see it, a score of 50 is average. That's the norm. So anything over 50 suggests that there's more than average, and anything less than 50 suggests that there's less than average. So what we're looking for in protective factors are scores above 50, because that would indicate that we do things that are protecting the kids. The line here is 50, so most everything is across the line, and the average is 58, which makes some sense. There's a lot of stuff to do in the town, and there's a lot of involvement by the kids. So there are a lot of sports, there are a lot of clubs, there's the drama club, there are church activities. There's a ton for kids to do that would prevent these types of things. That number doesn't really jump off as particularly concerning. When you break those numbers down into details, the one thing that tends to erode over time is what they were calling social skills, which really measures their response to peer pressure. And Torrin can talk a little bit about the types of peer pressure, but there's a difference between me offering you a drink and you saying no, because that's relatively easy, versus the perception that everyone is doing it and therefore I must. And I don't know if you want to chime in with more detail there or correct my
Well,
summary.
peer influence is what
Peer
you just
influence,
meant.
right.
Peer influence is certainly one of the things that kids get most influenced by, and not necessarily a kid saying, try a drink, try this drug, try that, but more, are the kids doing it in my class? Are the kids doing it in my grade? Are the kids trying it? And that would probably be more powerful than a kid asking them. And certainly they teach, these folks teach refusal skills in middle school, learning how to say no, and so they're pretty skilled at that. But they, as we know, when teens get to be a certain age, and you know, if you have teens, when they start to challenge, they will start to take the perception and the things that their peers do as more important than what you folks are telling them and their parents are telling them. Because they don't think we really know what we're talking about. And they look at what their friends are doing. So that's where peer influence becomes a little challenging, or very challenging.
I also think, and this isn't explicit, but it's more of just an aside and perhaps an observation, that there are absolutely subtle messages that we send that kids pick up on when they're in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So, Jordan and I were talking about earlier, and I think Mike had been part of that conversation too, but holidays like Halloween, right? When it becomes kind of normative to be walking around following your kids with a beer, right, or a drink. And that's not a big deal, and that's not a judgment. I just wonder how much of that they pick up on, right? When we're celebrating sports victories with alcohol, whether it's at a team celebration, whether it's at somebody's house, and it's the cookout, the exposure to it and the kind of the subtle message that anything is worth celebrating with a drink, I think that they pick up on as the stakes become higher up in high school. And possibly, and it's not something that I can say, yep, we absolutely can prove that this is true, but I wonder how much of the subtle messages that we're sending they're picking up on and starting to mimic as they mimic other adult behaviors. Risk factors are those that obviously increase the risk of these behaviors happening. And we see a couple of things in these slides. Anything that has an elevated score of 50, basically I circled the largest ones, but anything over 50 indicates a relative presence of risk factors. And the two that are the biggest are peer attitudes, which is down here, and some of the community laws, norms, the perception of favorable drugs. The other one that's interesting to point out really just applies to the 12th graders, where it becomes in the family domain. So family history of these kinds of behaviors, attitudes towards alcohol, drug, and tobacco abuse, or use, is at 62, and parental attitudes that kind of celebrate these behaviors is up around 60. So by the time you're a senior, that kind of family domain works its way in, but for most of the kids, it's mostly peer pressure, and what they perceive is the more cultural attitudes and norms towards things like marijuana and alcohol. We wanted to dig a little bit deeper into their perceptions of risk. So these are the student perceptions of risk. And what we see is that, for the most part, everybody in the school thinks that cigarettes are about as bad as prescription drugs, right? And that's probably the result of the anti-smoking campaign. It just isn't allowed anymore. The numbers drop a little bit with alcohol, which isn't that surprising, but dramatically with marijuana. They do not think, students by and large do not think that marijuana is particularly risky at all. That's interesting to compare to this. So the last one was what they actually perceived. This is what they believe their friends perceive. So there was still a relatively high risk or perception of high risk among the students that alcohol was dangerous. That drops off considerably when you ask them whether their friends think it's risky. And that's important to know too, because if you have a room of 10 people and all of them are on their own, say, I think that having that beer is going to be a problem, right? But they all think that the other 9 think it isn't that big a deal, then that might lead them to make a choice that isn't in their best interest. And again, lower for alcohol, much lower for marijuana. And the final slide indicates what they think their parents' perception is. So again, very high for cigarettes, drops off a little bit for alcohol, and considerably for marijuana, most substantially among seniors who think that their parents don't think it's a big deal at all. I wanted to bring in a little bit of school data to your question about how prevalent is this. And this goes up through last school year. So these are the alcohol, tobacco, and other drug-related discipline incidents for the past few years, and this is taken out of our discipline system. Relatively low numbers in 12 and 13, even smaller numbers in 13 and 14, and then a big jump. I don't think we are on the same trajectory, because I think that the number of incidents this year is smaller, but I also will say in the spirit of the primaries that it's probably too early to call, because we do see more activity as the weather gets warmer and kids get outside and they can take the trips to the water tower or have a nice stroll in Whitney Woods or wherever they want to hang out. So it's a little bit too early to make that determination now, but I do think on the whole, I have not seen as much activity this year as I had last year. Chemical health violations. Chemical health violations refer to the MIAA's chemical health rule. So if a student was caught drinking at a party over the weekend, the school doesn't have any jurisdiction about what happens outside of the school. The MIAA has jurisdiction in the sense that they can prohibit that student from playing in a certain number of contests. And it has some teeth. So and we have no latitude in it. It is not a judgment call on our part. If we get a police report that a student was in possession and consuming alcohol, that student faces a chemical health violation. Otherwise, we forfeit all kinds of stuff. That number jumped dramatically last year. From less than 2 in 2 years prior to about 15 at the end of 14-15. Some of the questions in the back end of the survey ask kids to kind of self-evaluate their feelings of self-worth. And so I point out the alcohol and marijuana statistics, I point out the discipline statistics, but I'm really curious about these statistics here because these are the questions that will get at the underlying causes or could potentially get at the underlying causes. We are, and we've said it in several venues, of the mindset that kids are kids, they make mistakes, they should be able to recover from those mistakes. And that doesn't mean that they are without consequences, it just means that they learn from it, they move on, and everybody can move in a positive direction. But more concerning is why a student would feel like he or she needed to be under the influence in order to survive the day, the weekend, whatever it is. So as much as those prior slides are concerning, this is the type of information that really requires our consideration. About a third of the kids in the high school don't feel great about themselves. So the first question says, at times I think I am no good at all. And of all 9th through 12th graders, that's 25% that answered Yes. 30%, when you take the small yes and the big yes, is a lot of kids, right? Of the 450 kids, 30% of that is roughly 140, 150 kids. Second question, all in all, I am inclined to think that I am a failure. We have high numbers there. 12%, 9 to 12, with a 17% of this last year's sophomore class. In the past year, have you felt depressed or sad most days, even if you feel okay sometimes? Again, almost 30% of the school feel sad or depressed most times. And that's a hard statistic to wrap your mind around. Because, and I mentioned this at school committee, if I'm up at the cafeteria and every single kid in the high school is in the cafeteria, I can't point to 10 kids who I think feel sad or depressed most of the time. And I'm pretty good at judging that type of stuff. So to think that there are that many kids who are suffering on the inside means that we really need to pay attention to mental health.
Scott, are there national averages for those kinds of statistics as well?
No, their national study did not have these in there. But I do think that there are studies that show that it's on the rise, particularly in colleges. There's a lot of data out there now that says that college health services are being inundated with students who are depressed, anxious, feeling overwhelmed. A lot of schools are trying to tackle that head on. And so, I know there's actual data there, and I think this mimics that, but I don't know how we rank in terms of the others. From the other regional schools that I've seen looking at their youth risk behavior stuff, we seem to be right around on par, if not maybe a little bit more.
It's not untypical in the higher socioeconomical schools to see that.
Yeah,
The Duxbury's, the Hingham, the Cohasset.
yeah, Sharon, Needham. Yeah.
So if we look at the youth risk behavior surveys, which I had done when we first did that, we still are higher though. We're a little bit higher. Which is, again, of all the things on here, this may be the most concerning. It depends how you feel, but
Yeah,
to me, this is very concerning.
And anecdotally, it's not a profile of a student, right? It's not someone who's got really lousy grades and a troubled group of friends. It is that kid. It's also the kid who feels socially isolated. It's also the kid who's captain of 3 sports, who's in all kinds of artistic celebrations, who's getting celebrated in school. It really runs the gamut, when we look at our, internal population. Please.
I can wait till later if you want, but
It's up to you.
there could be 2 influences on that. I don't know if there's any data for kids have cell phones. And that, that's just.
I don't know, but I do think that social media absolutely changes the way students act.
The second point is the helicopter sort of generation these days, of parents they're saying to their kids, it's okay to feel bad, let me know your feelings. But I just wonder if it's, really empirical and unequivocal that those numbers reflected the kids and how they feel.
So you're saying that maybe they just know that it's okay to say that more than they might have in the past? It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. They certainly know the language of depression more than they ever have in the past, because they will say it to me. Mr. Feeling, Mr. Scott, I want you to know that I'm feeling safe right now, but and I didn't even mean for that to come off as funny. Like that's what they will say when we're evaluating, how bad is it right in the moment. We have some statistics, in terms of students who are diagnosed with emotional disabilities and are on, ed plans for that. The number of emotional disabilities is usually very small. And it still is, but it has increased significantly. The number of crisis center referrals has continued to climb. And the adjustment counselor caseload, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we doubled our adjustment counselor staff from 1 to 2. They are still packed to the gills right now. So that number does absolutely continue to decline. And part of that might be that they do a very good job and people want to go down and avail themselves of the services. But even if it's that they are self-reporting more, and that gives us a better handle, that population still exists in numbers that we didn't think were there before. So that's the data. What have we done? Next steps kind of in the 15, 16 year, a lot of this has already been done. Really three kind of, big buckets. Understanding the underlying causes, developing strategic partnerships, and implementing some strategic initiatives. So without running through every slide, certainly we've presented it to the faculty, we've presented it to the school committee, so we've shared it with folks. We're sharing it with you now. We wanted to get a little bit more information under our belt before we did, and we're going to share it with the students now that we have a better handle on what exactly is happening. We've worked pretty closely with the Safe Harbor Coalition. Carolyn has attended some conferences. We've worked with the Norfolk District Attorney and created some partnerships there through something called Team Rival. I've been working with the Youth Health Connection on some underage drinking. Torin has also obviously attended some conferences. And the partnership we have with the police has never been better with Sergeant Lopes here. So that kind of communication and strategic partnerships and kind of working together to all be on the same page, I think, helps. A couple other strategic initiatives, and this is part of a much longer, more comprehensive plan that we are going to try to roll out down the future, linked to the school improvement plans and similar documents. But we identified the curriculum units in middle and high school because I think it's important for people to know what are we currently teaching the kids, right? What information are they getting and when? We made a couple of strategic decisions in terms of where we want to target that. So all sophomores and all seniors are required to take health. But if the jump in behaviors is from 9 to 10, we're going to offer or try to offer all of our sophomore courses in the fall so that every sophomore gets it before that stuff happens. So Torin will be right in front of them. Same thing with the seniors. Their biggest transition is going to be from here to college, right? And we want to make sure that they have the tools to be able to be successful there. So Torin's, 12 courses a year basically is now going to divide in half, 6 in the front half of the year, 6 in the back half of the year with sophomores and seniors because we think that might be more effective. We had Mental Health Awareness Week last week, which went great. We're forming a SAD chapter, Students Against Destructive Decisions. In the middle school, there's also going to be a middle school Gender and Sexuality Alliance, and Drug Story Theater is something that we partnered with the Safe Harbor to put together, and that's coming in May, I believe.
Scott, what did Mental Health Awareness Week look like?
You want to speak to it?
Sure. There was a fellow who lives in Hingham whose nephew had committed suicide in Virginia. And he had gone there and helped quite a bit in raising some funds for the family and for a scholarship. As that grew, the family in Virginia wanted to spread some of the wealth, the money that was earned, the scholarships possibly later on, to the South Shore where this gentleman lived, and he lives in Hingham. So he gave Cohasset, Hingham, Whitman-Hanson, and Duxbury an opportunity to use some of the funds to raise some awareness for mental health. So we had my senior classes each day had a different model and activity to share with the whole school, a mental health awareness opportunity. The first day that we did it was Monday. The kids all came in, and if you wrote an uplifting note, and we posted it on an easel as the kids all came in from school, they were able to get a Munchkin. So we bribed them. And that seemed to go well. The kids had a lot of fun with that. Each day, one senior class, one senior group read a statistic about mental health in the morning announcements, and then they also read a skill that you could use to overcome that possible anxious moment. Those are some of the things. We did a shootout at lunchtime in the gymnasium, and we gave out some stress balls to kids that were able to get some baskets in, and some other things that they were handing out. Those were a couple of things. They did a Twitter account where they one group tweeted out to all the kids could join in on the Twitter account, and they tweeted out some stats about mental health, some the people in the school that you could go to see if you were feeling stressed. So we spread the word that way. Each senior group of about 4 or 5 kids did something. We had a looping during lunchtime. I think one of them might have been utility. We had a looping show about different things with mental health and some stress reduction techniques. So as the kids walked through the lunchroom or at the senior CAF that day, they saw a looping show, which was good. And the kids came up with this stuff on their own, and it was really, I think it was well received, and the kids did a great job with it. I thought it was good.
Yeah, they're very comfortable talking about it. And I'm going to turn it over to Tora now to talk about what we are actually doing in the curriculum. But, for the most part, we're having a lot of conversations with a lot of different subgroups in the school often, and I would venture to say every day, right? And it's remarkable because of the 20 different things that you might be doing in a given day, every now and then one will pop off. And for example, Torin took a bunch of kids off-site to a workshop, and a couple of them came back and said, you know what, that kind of sounds like me, or that sounds like my friend. And all of a sudden, we have 3 or 4 kids that we might have just prevented something because they were comfortable enough to listen to it, identify with it, talk about it, and then ask someone what they can do. So that's very good.
Yeah, that's great.
But I'll turn it over to Tora now, and I can put the slides for you, to talk about what exactly we do at each grade level, and then what we plan to tell the kids in a couple of weeks.
How we got here. First, a couple of years ago, well, just would have been last year, Carolyn asked me if I would graciously become the health coordinator. So that I was happy to do. And the first thing I said to both Carol and Brian, I said, we need to get a survey because we need to find out what our kids are doing. We hadn't had a risk youth behavior survey since 2010. So we were in the middle of kind of reforming our curriculum. So I said, well, we need to know what to target if we're going to, while we're in this curriculum reorganization. So that's when Brian and Carolyn said, yeah, let's go for it. Let's get a survey going so we know what to target, we know what to look for in our kids. And that's kind of how we got in here. And this year, Brian outlined many of the things that we've started to do. Next week, or I think after vacation, we're going to start to take a look and bring in each grade level, or sometimes 2 grade levels at a time. And that's where Amy and Mike will come in. These 2 folks, we were very lucky to hire in the last 2 years. Mike comes to us with 20 years experience from Wilmington High School, and his expertise is excellent, and I'm glad we were able to wrestle him down here, no pun intended. Yeah, he's a wrestling coach. So, and if your kiddo has him, I'm sure you've already heard about him. He's larger than life. And Amy comes to us after a couple of years teaching in New Hampshire and Holliston, had a reduction in force, and we were lucky that they did because we were able to get her down here. So she has a newer look on all the things that are being taught at the health level, and has given us some great ideas already about some of the things that are being taught in college about health and wellness currently. So I'm happy that we've got some great people in great places, because if we look back in time, kids were only getting health in either 8th grade and maybe sophomore year. And then Mrs. Duffy was able to get some of the kids in 7th and 8th grade, or maybe 6th and 8th, or maybe 6th and 7th. But now, with these 2 folks back on board, and we're able to get the kids in senior year as well, kids will now have health in 6th grade, in 7th grade, in 8th grade. They'll do alcohol awareness with Mr. Ford when they have freshman gym or freshman PE. They take a couple weeks to do alcohol EDU, so there's no gap there. Plus that kind of helps with what we're trying, that trouble time between freshman and sophomore year. So Mr. Ford does that with them in freshman year, then they'll have me for sophomore year in that first semester, and then again in senior year. If we could do a junior year, we'd love to, but I don't think that's gonna happen too soon. So what we're going to share with the kids after vacation, with the 6th and 7th graders, we'll bring them in. We're gonna talk to them about if you see something that you don't think is okay, if you hear something about a friend that you don't think is okay, then here are the people that you talk to. And we will make sure that Leanne McCarthy, who spoke earlier, adjustment counselor, is there. Emily Manawal will be there. Amy and Mike will be there. We'll be there and say, these are the people that are here to support you. These are the people that you need to lean on when you're feeling anxious, when you think that somebody's using a drug that they shouldn't be using, if you think that a friend of yours is drinking or is trying something. That will be the message to the 6th and 7th graders, and of course, as well as the curriculum that they'll cover. But we want to make sure we talk to those kids, because some kids might not have health until later in the year, and some kids will have health in the beginning of the year. So we want to make sure we talk to all of them. The 8th graders will bring in and speak to them about this big transition from 8th grade to 9th grade. And it is a pretty big one. The stakes are a little bit higher. They'll be doing, some of them being sports, activities, extracurricular activities. We'll make sure that they are thinking about choosing their friends wisely. And that choosing your friends may have a lot to do with where your path goes and where your decision goes. And you can also change friends at this time in 8th grade if you think it's beneficial to you. Excuse me while I put my glasses on. And that these decisions going from 8th grade to 9th grade are going to be, could be extremely important and critical. The 9th graders will talk about peer pressure and peer influence, what we just discussed a little bit earlier. We'll talk about their decision makings. And now that you're in 9th grade, the decisions that you make can affect you for your entire high school career. Getting caught drinking or making a bad decision may affect you being on National Honor Society. It may affect you becoming a captain of a team. It may affect you getting on, getting a role in a play or something like that. So that the stakes are a little bit higher, freshmen, and you're going to sophomore year, and this is an important time to make healthy decisions. And then that'll be supported, of course, by Alcohol EDU that Mr. Ford will do. We'll talk a little bit about the perception of risk, and is everybody doing it? We often hear kids say, everybody was at the party. So we hear that every once in a while, and I say to the sophomores and the freshmen, okay, let's define everybody. How many kids are in your grade? Oh, there's 100 kids in your grade. Okay. How many kids were at the party? Oh, 20. Oh, okay, so it wasn't everybody. And everybody was drinking? How many kids were drinking? Well, 8 kids were drinking. Oh, so out of 100, actually only 8 kids were there. Only 8 kids were doing something wrong. So if you weren't, you're in the majority. And we try to spin it more that if you're not doing it, you're in the majority, rather than the perception that may be the other way around. And that's critical in 9th and 10th grade. Because if their perception, as we saw, is that everybody's doing it, then they may do it, and that's a problem. So we'll talk to the freshmen and sophomores about that. Also, the 11th graders will talk a little bit about staying active, staying involved. Sometimes when kids say they're telling me, I'm not going to do a sport this year or this season. Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to be busy? Are you going to be going home and doing your homework every day after school? Maybe, some do. But what are you going to fill that time with? Because we know what idle time is, and it's not good. So those are some of the things that we'll discuss with the kids. And then, of course, with the seniors, we'll have transitioning to college. We've already started to do a number of those things in the senior classes. That mental health week was a great way to kind of kick off for those kiddos some of the challenges that they will see in college. 1 in 10 college kids either leave the school that they choose or they become depressed and anxious at their school and they don't finish their first year. That's pretty high. So one of the things I did with that senior class this last couple of months is we went to the lab and they all looked up the school, because most of them have pretty much chosen their school. And we said, let's look up your healthcare center at that school and look at all the services that they offer. Oh, they have groups that talk about drinking. They have groups that talk about drugs. They have groups that talk about what things can I do when I want to make healthy choices and don't want to be around alcohol or drugs. How can I get help? Is there a copay? Is it open 24 hours? What are the hotlines? all of those different things. How do we, are there groups for talking about depression and anxiety, and how do I balance my course load? So that's what we spent a couple days looking at. And some of the kids had not chosen their school yet, so they looked at the 2 schools that they're narrowing it down to, the 3 schools. So those are some of the skills that we'll give the seniors. But that will happen, I think, Carolyn, after vacation, we'll probably start to put that together.
The high school's potentially April 12th during utility, and then the middle school students will do the week after.
And that's what we'll talk to your kiddos about for some of this stuff that's gone on. There's been some discussion as to how much we want to show these guys about this topic and how much we want to see them to see. And not that it's a secret, but at the same time, I want to be careful about maybe showing them certain things, because if they look and see, wow, all these kids start to do this year, oh, maybe it's okay to do that. So I want to be careful about how we roll those stats out to them. I'd certainly take any comment on that, but that's how I'm leaning right now. I don't want them to see this spike in senior year that a lot of kids then try marijuana, so that they say, oh, well, those kids are going to do that. We need to change it. How are we going to change it becomes the $65 question, right? And I think part of it is the health teachers that we have in place now, because even our current sophomores right now did not have health in 8th grade. So is having these people in place going to help our kids? I hope so. If you're wondering about some of these trends, the increase or the use of marijuana in this town has been consistently higher than the national average since the year 2000, when we did youth risk behavior surveys back then. So it's not a new thing, but it is something that we need to change. And I think that's going to be an effort between the new health setup with the teachers, coordinating the curriculum around some of these key points, like depression, the alcohol use, the drug use. I've already looked at the curriculum in the sense of making the drug unit, 2 weeks long than where it was 1 week long, because you're dealing with issues such as eating disorders, and you're dealing with issues such as dating abuse, and you're dealing with all kinds of issues, and you only have 8 weeks to cover it. So how much time do you put in to each unit? Because some people would say, well, eating disorders is more important. Some people would say that dating abuse is more important. It's what struck you as a person you may think is more important. So those are some of the changes that we're starting to make and starting to look at.
Jordan, this plan, how many minutes actually are you spending with each level? Is it one class, is like the week rolled out, like, we're gonna spend 60 minutes
Yeah.
with the 6th and 7th grade discussing, or, how many actually minutes are you gonna do this
So
for?
what we're talking about we're discussing what I just talked about, is
Yeah.
just going to be the utility period. They will spend a
How
whole
often do they have
trimester. They
utility?
will have a whole trimester. In middle school, they have a trimester. In high school, they have a semester.
And
So
how-
about
I'm sorry,
25
a
minutes or
quarter.
so.
Correction
Quarter.
point,
Yeah.
the actual assemblies for the 6th and 7th graders and the 8th graders will initially be a TST utility period, which is about 25 minutes long, based on our need to share information and the conversation that comes out of that. We have already planned into circling back to it if we need to, if we want to continue the conversation with the students. If they are asking interesting questions, or we realize we weren't able to delve as deeply as we wanted to in one or more of the points, we're leaving that part open. But we know, the audience on the age level, 25 minutes at a dose is about as much as they can take interest in,
And it's gonna be one dose.
for now. But we're saying we're not sure if we're circling back, depending on how it goes. If kids sit there and nod and smile, and we're making sure that we do it after lunchtime so that they're not, thinking about that instead.
Yeah.
If the conversation is fruitful and the kids are engaged and they have lots of questions, we're confident and have already alerted teachers that we'll run into class time. We'll just stay
Okay.
until the conversation naturally dissolves of itself, and we will be able to look at each other halfway through and say to the kids, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna meet again in 2 weeks' time, and that's when we're gonna tackle that subject. We wanna kind of see what their response is to it. It might be that the younger students, and that's why we've broken down the grades the way that we have, to create a comfort level in terms of asking questions. The 8th and 9th grade topics are quite similar, even though the 9th grade has a big transition. But the 8th graders aren't going to ask the questions that they would ask if they're alone, if the 9th graders are in the room, because they're already cool high school kids, all grown up, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, the 9th graders aren't opening their mouths if they're with the 10th and 11th graders. So the high school utility period is a bit longer, but that'll be cut in half. So everyone will get about a half an hour in terms of the introduction and the rollout of the conversation. The health teachers are able to continue the conversation in their classes with some of the groups that they have, and or as a team, we're going to decide what are our next steps. But this is just kind of our initial jumping off period. These are the topics we know we want to share with the students. And you'll notice, Mr. Sweeney has outlined the presenters, and though myself and Kerry and Brian will be there and Sergeant Lopes will be there at all of the presentations, we've tried to make the folks sharing the information, not the folks with whom you occasionally are in hot water, right? So we're there as a support, we're there as a go-to person, and I think that most of the student body sees us that way. But the reality is, if they're hearing about it from the screen and from Mr. Pimentel and from Mr. Sweeney, that's the actual teacher. Now, I know that this person is an expert. I already kind of thought if I was in this situation, I could go to Ms. Conley or Mrs. Sandler for help. But now I'm hearing about it from these people, and it isn't you shouldn't because, right? So it feels less like a conversation around, and by the way, these things violate the code of conduct. It's really about healthy choices, healthy living. So it's coming from the folks who are responsible for your physical wellness and your mental wellness. And so we've made a really conscious decision to try to roll it out that way. And again, we'll see what happens, and we'll revisit it as often as we think is prudent.
You're
And it's one
willing
of
to
many
cut
things
in-
that are happening, and one of many conversations. So, like I've said before, and I might be stealing this from somebody else, like there's 450 kids in the building that generally take my advice, and a 4-year-old sitting at home who wants nothing to do with it, right? So sometimes who delivers the message is really important, and what the context is, and how, long or short it is depends on the age, and the background of the kids that are involved. So this is a conversation, but those conversations are happening on sports teams, they're happening in health class. In general, hopefully they're happening at home, they're happening in the community. So it's if the same people are giving the same message, at some point, someone typically says like, I'm gonna listen to you, because I really respect you.
What about the kids who don't have health this semester, though? They don't get to continue that conversation in health. It kind of just stops at the 25 minutes.
Not necessarily, because we have also guidance workshops. It's kind of front and center. There's Mental Health Awareness Week, there's Drug Story Theater. There's lots of stuff that are continually coming up in the course of the year. The reality is we also have to teach English and math and some other things
That's
too.
what I mean. How
But
willing are you to cut into academics to actually serve these students? Are you willing to do
In
that?
a perfect world,
I think we
we'd
do.
love to have help
Yeah.
every day,
I
but
know,
that's
I think
just
we
not,
should.
that's not a reality. And this is by no means is this a teaching model, if you know what I mean. This is
Right.
not when they're gonna learn about this stuff. They're gonna learn about this stuff in class. We're gonna talk to them about decisions and the people that can help them during this time frame.
Okay, okay.
So that if they didn't have health until second trimester or second semester, they would say, oh, well, but I know who he is now because they told me who Mr. Pimenta was, and Sergeant Lopes, of course, is a good person to know as well, who has been instrumental in the increase in drug awareness that I've done in the units for the kids this year. And he's been in the classroom numerous times during that 2-week period, and it's been well received. He's very knowledgeable. The kids feel comfortable asking him questions. We've got a great teaching model right now. I think he and I bouncing things off. He knows things I don't know, and I know things that he hasn't come across, and so we've worked very well together. And I hope, again, we won't know, unfortunately, we won't know whether the changes that we're making are gonna be helpful for a couple of years, right? Until this survey is done a year and 2 away. Now, that's frustrating, of course, but at the same time, we get feedback from kids, too, that what's going on. So hopefully we'll get more positive
And
feedback.
the reason that we share the curriculum topics for 6 through 12 is so that you can see and be reassured that these things are already taught. These are already curriculum units, and the assembly piece is more about reminding students that
Okay.
these aren't isolated conversations that we're having that are not relevant to your lives. This is you, because you told us so. And so rather than, I don't know, what might not be this current sixth grade, but it's the current seventh graders, and this is what they told us that they do. So we wanna make it relevant to students. We know that that's when they learn best, when they're able to identify behaviors that are actually, happening around them, and that it's not, there's no deniability. Because, and we're not looking to lay blame, and we're not looking to heap the guilt on. We're looking to say, we know that these are constant issues, we know that these are typical situations that arise at various points of adolescence, but for us, for the Cohasset kids right now, this is how you're feeling. So that's really what the jumping off point of the assemblies is for.
In essence, we can say to the kids, that you guys told us, you eighth graders told us that 33% of you guys were anxious. So here are the people that can help you with this. And through the Q&A with the kids too, some things will come out that we can say, oh, let's take a look at that. You know, the kids mentioned this, let's make sure we cover that. You know, let's not let that slip in in our classes. So that's helpful. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. Do we have anything before we want to go to Q&A?
Yeah,